Hello there and welcome to the first Greatest Albums Reviewed. My name is Dave Arthur, and over the course of many vids I hope to be reviewing many classic albums and hope that it may inspire new listeners to tune in and bliss out. With the advent of apps like Spotify and Apple iTunes, there is no reason to not become retro and listen to some of the greatest music ever recorded from the 60s, 70s and 80s. So what is stopping you? And if you're interested in becoming a vinyl collector, then hopefully some of my reviews will pique your interest in legendary music artists. This channel will review albums, but like a lot of channels, I will immerse myself in all sorts of music-based fun depending on the feedback I get or what I think is a bit different. So let's not waste another min and get started on this channel's first album review. So, for the first of my album reviews, I have decided to discuss an album by my favourite solo artist, David Bowie. Now, this does not mean that I'll just be picking my all-time favourite albums by my all-time favourite artists. My intention is to cover as many classic albums as I can, and of course I am open to any ideas as to what I can review. But if I'm going to start somewhere, then why not with a classic album that is not only close to my heart, but is also considered one of the greatest albums ever recorded. When one thinks of David Bowie, a lot of people will immediately think of the Ziggy Stardust period, complete with glam rock pretensions, astral spheres or lightning flashes across his face. This is perfectly understandable. Or maybe you might even see Bowie dancing his strut, looking pretty dapper in the Australian outback to the funk of Let's Dance, which in terms of sales was his most successful album in 1983. With Hunky Dory, in terms of personnel, there is that link with Ziggy Stardust, as Hunky Dory is the first Bowie album that used the lineup of the legendary Mick Ronson on guitar, Trevor Bolder on bass and Mick "Woody" Woodmansey on drums, the same lineup that was there alongside Bowie during the Ziggy Stardust heydays. However, one cannot leave out the contribution of the Yes keyboard legend that is Rick Wakeman, who contributed to 4 of the tracks, most notably the beautiful piano that makes the hairs on your arms stand on end during Life on Mars. And Wakeman pretty much knew straight away that Hunky Dory was going to be a great album, telling The Guardian that, "I remember telling people I just played on what was going to be a very iconic album," which Hunky Dory of course was. Unlike with the Ziggy Stardust album, Hunky Dory did not initially take off in terms of chart position. One of the reasons touted was that RCA did not promote it, as they were worried about Bowie's liking for changing his image and that he would do that during any promotion of the album. Bowie's 4 previous albums had gradually been building up sales. The Duran release David Bowie in 1967 reached 125 in the UK charts. The Philips release that was also titled David Bowie, also known as the Space Oddity album in 1969, eventually reached 17, probably due to the hit that the single Space Oddity was, and The Man Who Sold the World in 1970 reached 24 in the charts. However, Hunky Dory was not zooming up the charts upon its release, and one can wonder if Bowie's mythical chameleon approach to music was responsible for this. Bowie's 1967 album saw him in his Anthony Newley mode, producing pleasant enough songs, but with arrangements that could now be seen as somewhat dated. Although personally speaking, this was the time when he produced In the Heat of the Morning, Love You Till Tuesday and The Laughing Gnome, so it wasn't a total washout. The second eponymously titled album in 1969 contained Space Oddity, but this legendary track did not give a direction to the style of the songs on this album, which were a mix of folk and somewhat progressive rock, with the odd acoustic number thrown in for good measure. His third album, The Man Who Sold the World, was pure hard rock with lyrical content that challenged the listener with themes of murder, madness, fantasy and God, even alluding a little bit to the schizophrenia that affected members of Bowie's family. But Hunky Dory was written when Bowie's life had changed yet again. He had married Angie and they had become parents to Zoe, and this shows itself on the songs and arrangements on Hunky Dory, with there being a less harsher rock sound than on The Man Who Sold the World. So if you were hoping to listen to Hunky Dory in order to listen to The Man Who Sold the World too, then you might have been disappointed. Maybe RCA had a point after all. But as all Bowie fans knew, you didn't expect anything from a new Bowie album, you just listened and accepted. After the success of the Ziggy Stardust album and the single Starman, sales of Hunky Dory were boosted and it climbed to a very satisfactory number 3 in the UK charts. In 1970, Bowie signed a new songwriting contract with Chrysalis, and this led to Bowie writing a whole new batch of songs on piano, which were unlike his previous writing efforts, which had been composed on his guitar. This makes sense when you bear in mind that Bowie had told Rick Wakeman that he wanted Hunky Dory to have a piano-orientated sound. Songs that were written during this time included Oh You Pretty Things, which appeared on Hunky Dory and also became a solo hit for Peter Noone of Herman's Hermits, and Moon Age Daydream and Hang On To Yourself, which would later appear on the Ziggy Stardust album. Hunky Dory was recorded while Bowie had no record contract, with Bowie having finished his contract with Philips for the previous 2 albums. But when Bowie's new manager Tony DeFries showcased the new song to record companies, RCA was one of half a dozen record companies that responded enthusiastically, and Bowie dutifully signed to them. It is said that he signed to RCA because it was Elvis's record company, but this is just a maybe story. RCA then bought the rights to the Philips albums, enabling them to release those albums again when Bowie became more successful. So with a new songwriting contract and a new record contract, the scene was set for a new album that, in a way, pressed the reset on Bowie's career. The songs on Hunky Dory therefore show where Bowie was in his life, most notably the song Kooks, which was written after Zoe was born in Bromley Hospital. It's an album where Bowie's songwriting matures to the point where he shows that he can write a 3-minute pop hit along with the best of them, writing tracks that were arguably more accessible to the generic listener, given that they aren't as heavy as The Man Who Sold the World and as folky and progressive as the material on the second David Bowie album. Indeed, a minute into the opening track of Changes, and you know that you are listening to a song written by a young man that has already earned his songwriting dues via an already impressive song back catalogue. Bowie admitted to Uncut magazine in 1999 that Hunky Dory gave me a fabulous groundswell. I guess it provided me, for the first time in my life, with an actual audience. It's also an album where Bowie sings about people that have influenced his career at that point. Songs like Andy Warhol and Song for Bob Dylan are obvious regarding who they have been written for, but Queen Bitch is a nod towards the work of the Velvet Underground. Bowie's previous 2 albums had been produced by Tony Visconti, the legendary producer who was a constant in Bowie's career, from performing with Bowie on stage in his early days, right up to his production of Bowie's final masterpiece, Black Star. Unfortunately, Bowie's decision to sign with Tony DeFries was met by Visconti's disapproval, hence his absence from the production of Hunky Dory. Instead, Bowie chose the services of Ken Scott, who was an EMI engineer that had worked on Bowie's 2 previous albums. This arrangement was so successful that Scott went on to produce the 3 albums that followed until Bowie changed musical direction with his Diamond Dogs album. Now, we can look back and see Hunky Dory as one of Bowie's most successful albums, with its original release spending 150 weeks on the UK charts, third behind the Ziggy Stardust and Best of Bowie albums. Abroad, it reached number 57 in the US, 43 in Canada and 45 in Australia. But what about the songs that make up Hunky Dory? Let's have a look at these in a bit more detail. Track 1, Changes. It is something strange that if I should mention the Bowie song Changes to friends or family, they may say that they have heard of it or that they don't really know it. But the moment you try to replicate the ch-ch-ch-changes line of the chorus, they suddenly remember it. It is now a well-recognised part of Bowie's back catalogue, despite never being a hit single, and to start Hunky Dory off with it could now be seen as a masterstroke. From the first solo chords of Wakeman's piano at the start to the chug-along lead up to the first verse, we find ourselves listening to lyrics that could well be described as a mini-biography of Bowie at that time, the changing of his musical styles and how he had been down a million dead-end streets in his quest for fame and recognition of his work. Bowie sings how he would turn myself to face me in order to understand how people were seeing him and whether he would be seen as a faker, which Bowie was always determined not to be. He would rather be original and keep changing, testing those that watched him perform because he was always too fast to take that test. The chorus literally stutters us into a memorable section where the first two lines are musically repeated, albeit with the slightly changed lyrics, before Bowie tells us that while time may change him, he can't actually trace time himself. Which could be said of all of us really, but rarely have people gone through the changes that Bowie insisted on in order to make himself always relevant, and there is a sense that changes is a precursor of Ziggy Stardust and all the other personas that Bowie would take on in the future. Look out, you rock and rollers, indeed. Track 2, Oh You Pretty Things. I have heard this song described in numerous ways, and with subjective views abounding from different directions, but one thing is for sure, it showcases Bowie's ability to make you think and doubt what you knew about the track when you eventually take the lyrics apart. The chorus is clearly telling all the younger generation that their determination to be different is driving their mamas and papas insane, but that the oldies must make way for the homo superior, clearly a generation that would tell the oldies just where they went wrong. There is also the point of view that Bowie is mentioning in the 60s bands The Pretty Things and the Mamas and Papas, but it's when you listen to the rest of the song that you may well doubt if the song is as cut and dried as that. On The Man Who Sold the World, the subject of schizophrenia was touched upon, on songs such as The Width of a Circle and All the Madmen, and here we see Bowie refer to it again, singing about the crack in the sky and a hand reaching down to me. Bowie's brother Terry was diagnosed as schizophrenic, and during a breakdown he had described to Bowie how he had seen cracks in the ground with fire and smoke coming out of them. For Bowie to then take those images but instead talk of a crack in the sky is almost akin to the work of psychiatrists like Carl Jung, and in the context of the song we can start to read it in a different way. Instead, one could see the song coming from a schizophrenic narrator who despairs of how the current generation is looking after the planet and that the children aren't so much children as a totally different race that will make amends. Just like all the nightmares have come to stay, then this new breed of strangers have come to stay as well, to replace the current Homo sapiens that have outgrown their use. Indeed, the use of the phrase Homo superior gives us a link to tracks like The Supermen from The Man Who Sold the World. The verses are sung almost like a conversation with the narrator, while the jolly tune that accompanies the chorus is in a jarring juxtaposition of the lyrics that could be described as a little bit menacing. But this didn't stop Peter Noone from having a big hit with it, although he did sing The Earth is a Beast and not The Earth is a Bitch, just to make it more family friendly. Track 3, 8-line poem. This is a short track that is genuinely 8 lines long. I have called it track 3, but it is often seen as the tag onto the end of Oh You Pretty Things. It's my least favourite song on the album, but according to some critics, it is a track that is badly overlooked, and that it is full of metaphor. Bowie said in an interview about it that it is the city that is a kind of high life wart on the backside of the prairie. So if you can make sense of that metaphorical jumble, then you are a better person than me. It's musically gentle, with an introduction of a minute of slow piano played by Bowie before he sings about a cactus by your window, Clara the cat putting her head between her paws, and the sun pinning branches to the sky. Mick Ronson adds a bit of country-like guitar at the end of a song that is inoffensive and easy to listen to, but lyrically oblique and cryptic. Track 4, Life on Mars. One of my favourite songs of all time, so please forgive any bias here. But it's my review, so I'm going to say that anybody that doesn't like this classic song is completely without taste. I joke. Or do I? Life on Mars is often thought of as Bowie's magnum opus. The song itself is considered to be a parody of My Way, and in fact uses the same chord sequences at the start. Bowie also writes on the back cover, next to the song title, inspired by Frankie, which I am sure Mr. Sinatra would have greatly appreciated. This song has all the makings of a timeless classic, from its thought-provoking lyrics, soaring vocal performance by Bowie, keyboard magic from Rick Wakeman, and excellent string arrangement from Mick Ronson. The song just works and stays in your head long after listening to it. Any lyrics that can put Mickey Mouse growing up a cow into a context must be damn good, and even now the question of who is the girl with the mousy hair still persists. However, most Bowie fans will point to Imani Farthingale, the girl who Bowie sang about in Letter to Imani on his second album, and who broke his heart when she split with him, even though Miss Farthingale has denied this. Regarding the song's subject matter, Bowie wrote that the song is a sensitive young girl's reaction to the media, that she is watching a film, and that the subjects in the film, for example, America, a mother, dog and clowns, John Lennon, Mickey Mouse, Norfolk Broads, etc., are uneasily juxtaposed with her real life, a real life that she is tired of, and she wishes to find an escape that she cannot obtain. But the beauty of this song is that, like a lot of successful songs, lyrically you can make it your own, and maybe that is the beauty of metaphorical lyrics. You can make them as subjective as you wish. I have known of people that see Life on Mars as a love song, and coincidentally, Bowie did once introduce it as a love song, so why not? For me, one of the best parts of the song though is the very end, with the telephone ringing as Wakeman's piano fades out. The story goes that there was a public telephone next to the studio, and it went off at the end of the song. You then hear some swearing from Mick Ronson in his Yorkshire accent. Ken Scott deemed this too good to leave out, so it was kept in, so by all means enjoy the brilliance of this track, but try to listen out for the telephone and kept in swearing at the end. You have to really listen, but it is there. Track 5, Kooks. If you are a parent, you will really appreciate this song, and if you aren't a parent, then it will make you want to be a parent. Maybe. This is the song that Bowie wrote for his son Zoe upon the time of his birth, and it captures the wonder that being a parent for the first time can bring. When you hold your child for the first time, you tell him or her of all the wonderful things that you are going to do together. And Bowie does this while also offering some advice. Sound advice like, don't pick fights with the bullies or the cads, because I'm not much cop punching other people's dads, or if your homework brings you down, then we'll throw it on the fire and take the car downtown. A line that Zoe, now known as Duncan Jones, said was untrue because he always had to do his homework. With its jangly acoustic guitar, the song moves along at a jaunty pace and is a much more light-hearted affair than the rest of the songs on the album, and maybe that's why so many people remember it, as it stands out from the rest as being a cheeky, amusing song about the joys of new parenthood. Bowie once said to Ken Scott that he would have loved to write more songs for children, and if this effort is anything to go by, you know the songs would have been well worth listening to. Track 6, Quicksand. Just as you were glowing in the happy feeling of the previous song, you are then plonked into some quicksand. If you take notes of what has been said about Bowie in the past, you always get some people that say that he was actually quite shy and that he had his vulnerabilities just like anybody else, and if there is a song that mirrors that view of Bowie, then Quicksand is it. This is Bowie at his most reflective, where he muses that his creative powers aren't as stable as he'd like, and that he could always slip into the quicksand of his thoughts, where he ain't got the power anymore. It's quite an honest piece of self-assessment that shows the grounded London boy in him, although it's a song that's full of imagery and has signposts to his interests at the time. For example, Churchill, Buddhism, Crowley, the Second World War and the work of Nietzsche, whose idea of the Superman had already been mentioned on The Man Who Sold the World. But if you are looking for a song that will lift you from any doubts about yourself, then this isn't necessarily a good listen, as Bowie sings that you shouldn't believe in yourself, don't deceive with belief, and that knowledge comes with death's release. Not exactly happy thoughts. Bowie would say that with its mix of reality and non-reality, the song was like a precursor to what he would record on his Low album. Whilst musically it's hard to make that connection, lyrically it kind of makes sense. One biographer said that Quicksand was inspired by Bowie's first visit to America, but Bowie, via his notes about Quicksand, said that because of his esoteric problems, the song could have been written in Plainview or Dulwich. And just in case you wanted to know, and why wouldn't you, Dulwich is a neighbourhood near Bowie's birthplace of Brixton in London. Track 7, Feel Your Heart. If you had the vinyl of Hunky Dory, then you'd have flipped the album over to be greeted by this interesting tune at the start of side 2. It is the only cover version on the album, but the way that Bowie performs it could easily make you believe that it was a Bowie composition. Written by Biff Rose and Paul Williams, the song appeared on Rose's debut album and, fun fact, appeared on the B-side of the Tiny Tim hit Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Feel Your Heart was performed by Bowie live on many occasions before Hunky Dory existed, but it was never intended to be on the album, with the song Bombers initially penciled in to start side 2 instead. To my ears, Bombers is the superior song and would have made the album even stronger, and it would have been a much more uplifting start to side 2. But on the other hand, it can be argued that the whole tone of Feel Your Heart does a good job to precede the two songs about Warhol and Dylan that follow it. Wakeman's upbeat piano drives this track along, and Mick Ronson does another sterling job with the orchestral arrangement. With its use of brass instruments, saxophone, violins and cellos, it is an idiosyncratic inclusion on the album. But Bowie cheerfully tells us that fears are just in your head, so forget your head and you'll be free. And also to remember that lovers never lose, and love clears the mind and makes it free. So you could be forgiven for thinking that after the more sombre Quicksand finished side 1, Bowie felt a more positive message was required to kick off side 2. And it does the job, even if Bombers would have been even more positive. I'm just saying. Track 8, Andy Warhol. As Feel Your Heart finishes, you find yourself listening to a bizarre minute of beeping noises, Ken Scott announcing take 1 of the next track, and Bowie deciding to correct his pronunciation of Warhol's surname, insisting that it's Warhol, before strumming a guitar chord and then laughing as he's asked if he's ready to sing. I've never understood why this was included, unless it was to give the impression that the track was being recorded as a live performance, but I guess it does highlight Bowie's well-known sense of humour. As a song, it is obviously about the famous American artist that had been of interest to Bowie since the 1960s, although the song was initially meant to be written for his friend Dana Gillespie. In Rolling Stone magazine, Bowie recorded meeting Warhol for the first time, describing him as yellow in complexion, a wig that was the wrong colour, and tiny glasses. When Bowie offered a handshake to introduce himself, Warhol backed away, which led to Bowie thinking that Warhol must be some kind of reptile, as he clearly didn't like flesh. With 2 acoustic guitars being played, there is a simple power to the chorus, as Bowie sings about Warhol looking a scream and hanging him on his wall. But the lyric can also be seen as a gentle piss take of Warhol, because he'll think about paint and he'll think about glue. What a jolly boring thing to do. Legend has it that when Bowie played Warhol the track, Warhol took offence at some of the lyrics, and it was only when Bowie was told that Warhol was insecure about his looks and how he was perceived that he understood why. Although I personally can't see what he could have been offended by. It is clearly a good-natured ditty. Track 9, Song for Bob Dylan. Just in case you didn't know who this song was about, despite its title, Bowie starts off by announcing, "Hear this, Robert Zimmerman," which was Dylan's real name. "I wrote this song for you about a strange young man called Dylan with a voice like sand and glue." In fact, the nasal way Bowie sings suggests that he was giving us an interpretation of Dylan's unique tones. But unlike his ode to Andy Warhol, this track isn't necessarily a letter from a fan, and while Bowie's early songs may have been influenced by some of Dylan's compositions, it didn't give the impression that he had much time for Dylan as a person. When a music journalist compared him to Dylan, Bowie replied that Dylan was a bad guitarist, had a bad voice,
and that his songs were boring. Instead, the song could be seen as Bowie asking where Dylan had disappeared to at the end of the 60s, after he had decided he needed a break from his success in that previous decade, to the point where he didn't even protest against the Vietnam War. Bowie sings that we lost your train of thought and your paintings are all your own, which could be a reference to Dylan's 1970 self-portrait album. Later on, he demands, "Give us back our unity, give us back our family, you're every nation's refugee, so don't leave us with their sanity." So even if Bowie had his negative views of Dylan, he clearly appreciated Dylan's standing as a voice of his generation. The song's chorus has been noted to have been influenced by the names of two Velvet Underground songs, Here She Comes Now and There She Goes Again. The track sounds like a Dylan song in places, maybe because of some of its chord changes, but it's often regarded as the least memorable song on the album. But if Bowie was aware of this opinion, then he didn't care less, as it was a track that he performed regularly in concert right up to the first Ziggy Stardust shows, when eventually it disappeared from the set list. The song itself was written for his friend George Underwood, who, as any Bowie fan will tell you, was the guy who punched Bowie in the eye during a fight over a girl, leading to Bowie's permanently discoloured left eye. Track 10, Queen Bitch. The penultimate track on Hunky Dory is the rockiest on the album and gives the listener a real flavour of what was to come on the following Ziggy Stardust album. In fact, in my opinion, it could be lifted and placed into the Ziggy Stardust song list and fit very nicely. It's a track that gives a nod to his appreciation of the Velvet Underground, especially their 1967 album that Bowie admitted playing over and over again. One of the tracks from that particular album, I'm Waiting for the Man, was covered by Bowie live on numerous occasions. This is a track that has been referred to as glam rock and also as proto-punk, but one thing that can be said is that unlike the rest of the album, Queen Bitch is driven along by the guitar genius of Mick Ronson, whose choppy, distorted guitar chords give an almost thrash-like feel to the song. Bowie's lyrics seem to give a landscape of characters that he is witnessing in his hometown of London, some of the city's less glamorous characters, as he observes cruisers and a prostitute who wears a frock coat and a bibbity-bobbity hat. Surely the only time those words have appeared so coolly in a rock song. Bowie's vocals on the track are understated, but when he tells the listener that with regards to the guy being led on by the prostitute, it could have been me, oh yes it could have been me, you really believe that he means it. But to reiterate, this track is a template for the Ziggy Stardust sound, with the Spiders from Mars in full flow, and it would have made for a great end to the album. That's if the Bowie Brothers hadn't been written. Track 11. The Bowie Brothers. The final track of Hunky Dory was not intended to be on the album. It was a late arrival, but to my ears, I cannot imagine the album having a different song at the end. This is a song that has been described by a Bowie biographer as probably the most cryptic, mysterious, unfathomable, and downright frightening Bowie recording in existence. And when you get to the end of the track, you might well agree with that description. What is also commonly agreed upon is that nobody can really explain what the song is about, with Ken Scott saying in Uncut magazine that I must have heard 10 or 15 different stories as to what the Bowie Brothers was supposed to be about, and I know that David would have agreed with every single one. It has been claimed that in 1977 Bowie admitted that the song was about his relationship with his brother Terry, who, as we have already mentioned, suffered from schizophrenia. In the Golden Years documentary, Bowie added that the track is another vaguely anecdotal piece about my feelings about myself and my brother, or my other doppelganger. Bowie sings that his brother lays upon the rocks. He could be dead, he could be not, he could be you. He's chameleon, comedian, Corinthian and caricature, which could easily back up that claim that the song is about Bowie and his brother, as he sees his brother's complex personality in 4 different ways. Or maybe is it Terry describing Bowie's chameleonic personality? But the truth is that just reading the lyrics alone will just confuse, and it seems to me that Bowie's metaphorical imagery is perfectly clear in his own mind. He knows exactly what he's singing about. But if you want to add your own meanings to them, then that is fine, and that was a typical approach that Bowie would take anyway. As Woody Woodmansey once said, he generally doesn't say, "this is about," even though the chorus might sum something up. It still leaves it wide open for you to interpret, and that's really what he's good at, which is why he's a cut above the rest. The song's slow pace is almost hypnotic as Bowie plays acoustic guitar and sings dryly, but clearly, so that you can hear every syllable of what he has to say. The verses are quite gentle affairs, but they lead to the chorus in a burst of energy as Bowie suddenly exclaims with more passion that they were so turned on by numerous scenarios, one of them being that the brothers were seen as fakers, which is a link to his theme in Changes. Perhaps the most intriguing part of the song is the end, which sounds markedly different from the rest of the track. It starts with the line, "Lay me place and bake me pie, I'm starving for me gravy," in a voice that could be described as haunting, and it has been likened to by a Bowie website as notably similar to that of the opening theme to the British horror film Blood on Satan's Claw. The end as the constant refrain of "Please come away," interspersed with many different voices, with Ken Scott saying that the end chorus is a multitude of very speeded voices. You can even hear the laughing gnome in there. Gnome or not, it still sounds eerie and disquieting. However, it was clearly a very important song to Bowie because he named his music publishing company after it, and also included it as one of 12 songs on the iSelect compilation that was given away free with a national UK newspaper. Therefore, it's the perfect song to end an album that is constantly named in the lists of best albums of all time.
Well, that's it for this video, my first ever YouTube video, and I hope you have enjoyed my review of David Bowie's Hunky Dory and maybe even learnt a bit more about this classic album. So until next time, from me, Dave Arthur, it's enjoy the music, tune in and bliss out. Cheers.